So you're going to do a thesis. So maybe it's a master's thesis, maybe it's an undergraduate thesis, may even be a PhD. But where people run into trouble is the economics, of course, is hard and it's a thing to do, but that's not usually where people run into problems. The main problems that I see students get into with theses are not really understanding what they're trying to do, making it a bigger thing in their head than it actually is. So let's talk about what it actually is. What are you trying to do with the thesis? What's the goal of the thesis? And people have different opinions, but mine is right, obviously. But I think what you're trying to do is to show that you can think like an economist, that you've learned a whole bunch of stuff, but it doesn't mean you can think, right? And you've learned loads of tools. It doesn't mean you know how to actually use them. And so this is an opportunity and to show that you can think like an economist, you can use the tools of your trade, and therefore you are an economist. Right? You learned a bunch of stuff, but you can't apply it in any way. That's not so great. And of course, it's an opportunity to show it off, but it's also an opportunity to learn, right? And so you don't know how to do it now. Hopefully, in 4 or 5 months, you will know how to do it, right? It's learning by doing sort of thing. What this means, though, is that when you read papers, right? So let's say you read a paper by Thaler. Right? Great. We all know he's great, and we don't have to wonder, does he know how to do economics? And so he doesn't have to convince us that he knows how to do economics, because we know it. And like if he's doing it different, that means we're doing it wrong. And so, but you don't have that luxury yet, right? Maybe later, but not now. And so what you have to do is you have to show us your thought process in more detail than you would in the papers that you see, right? You have to show us why you're making each decision. You have to show us that you're making each decision deliberately, that there's a reason you're doing it, that you know that there's a benefit to making it this way, but there's also a cost, right? Because everything ever done by humans is imperfect, and you're doing something as a human on a limited time schedule. You're doing it for the first time. And it's a paper, right? It's going to be a paper. It's not going to be the definitive word on any of this. It's going to be some information that you've learned using the tools of your trade, thinking sensibly as you're doing it, and you'll get something, but it won't be the definitive word on anything, right? So a mistake that I think a lot of students make is they think that they have to defend their thesis. And we even have like a thesis defense thing. But it's a wrong way to think about it. What you want to do is you want to present your work. You want to be doing sensible work that has the potential to lead to something interesting, that, yeah, we don't know the answer to this before we start, and you want to be making sensible decisions, and you want to be a scientist about it, right? What is the answer to this thing? And you want to be trying to find that, right? And if you can show that you're trying to do that, show that you're making decent decisions, you know that every decision you make is good in some ways, it's bad in some ways, right? There's always problems with it. If you're aware of the problems and you're aware of the benefits and you're making them in a deliberate way, that's a great thesis. Okay? What people tend to do is they say, this is super important, this is the way to do it. There's not just one way to do it, right? And so right there you say, people want to argue with your writing. They want to say, oh, well, why not this way, right? But if you say, look, there's this way, that would be great. I didn't have time to do it. I did it this other way. That's reasonable, right? There's this way. It has these benefits. It has these costs. I chose to do it this way, so I get these benefits, but I lost that other thing, and that's unfortunate. But that's a very sensible thesis. The other thing to say is that when people come in, they come in with these big ideas, because you're interested in the world, and so you're looking at the world and you're wondering about it, right? But for the thesis, you're trying to show that you can use the tools of your trade and that you can think like an economist, right? And so if you do a whole bunch of stuff kind of half-assed, you haven't shown that, right? It's a broad topic. You did all kinds of broad stuff. You haven't shown much. But if you do one really narrow thing really well, then when we read your thesis, you say, okay, she didn't do everything about international investment, clearly. It's one little thing really well. But if she can do that, then she can do the next thing really well, and the next thing really well, and the next thing really well. That's great, right? So people get hung up on what the topic is, and is it important, and how interesting it is. But for your grade, really it's your thought process, it's your care, it's your attention, and doing one thing really well that's more important. Actually, it's way more important than what results you get.